Hey everyone, this is Dwayne Monroe, and welcome back to Film Conversations. I am joined here once again by my co-hosts Samantha Youssef and Dennis Claxton, and this is part 2 of our conversation with Samantha about, I would say the political economy of Disney, to be grand about it, and also the history of labor action. Well, no, that's not the right way of putting it, because it's action against labor by the Disney organization. But before we dive in, how's everyone doing?
Doing good.
I'm doing well, thank you.
Dennis is he was on mute because he's eating I guess it's crisp banana chips covered in peanut butter, and he doesn't want to be crunching and munching on mic.
They are dipped banana bites.
Dipped banana bites, yeah.
Delicious.
Yeah, that does sound good. So we're going to pick up essentially where we left off with Samantha taking us through the history of layoffs in Disney, and because when in Variety and in other publications the layoffs of 2026 were announced, the way that the story was told in major media publications was that it was unprecedented. That this organization, Disney, so successful, so wealthy, so powerful, surely had never had layoffs or never conducted layoffs. But that's not the case. So I will turn the mic over to you, Samantha, to carry us forward.
Sure. Yeah, I think in general, there's been, I'm just trying to go through like all the dates here and stuff, but within the animation industry, layoffs have, like, at least on record that I've even found, which was before my time in the industry, like there's records going back to 1995 about major layoffs, because a lot of these studios, like in 1995, there was Bluth Studios, and for anyone that knows or doesn't know John Bluth, who was a former Disney animator, and then he sort of left Disney, created his own studio, and had, created films like Five Goes West or Secret of Nim, and all of these other productions that were kind of competing with Disney, I think, in the American market at the time. And then his studio, filed for bankruptcy, closed down in the 90s. So that was a whole team of artists that were laid off. And I say that because as animators in the industry, especially as the industry has evolved, like when I started at Disney, we were presented with lifetime contracts. But the way it is now is often artists get like a 1-year contract or something. So a lot of, from animators side or from the artist side, you're often drifting between Disney, Pixar, Sony. There used to be a studio called Blue Sky that shut down, and again, that's like massive amounts of layoffs because Blue Sky closed down. So over like the career of being an animation artist in this industry is constantly, there are constant layoffs happening on a regular basis. So within our circles, we're constantly, sharing like, where can you get work on the next project, or where can you do what, like just how to get work. Like people are being laid off all the time and in increasing numbers. So what was intriguing to me was the attention that this article got with Disney laying off 1,000, I think it was 1,000 people. And I don't think it was all animators, though. I think it's probably from different walks of the company.
Yes, that's my understanding from the Variety article. Yeah.
Yeah, and so what I find is interesting is why it got so much attention right now, and maybe that's something we'll explore. Like I'm not exactly clear on specifically why the media focused on this, but it did seem to get a lot of attention, not just in the US, but I think it was also published in some UK media and everything as well. And but we've had like layoffs in the industry are almost like every Tuesday, kind of. And so studios are always closing down. Departments of studios are closing down. I think that Disney feature animation is often a more protected space, but even the way that these studios operate, like for example, Marvel is sitting within the Disney franchise, but Marvel Studios will contract out work to like other, like MPC is another, is
Mm-hmm.
the Effect House or Frame Store, all these spaces.
Mm-hmm.
And these places are constantly laying off hundreds, if not thousands, of artists on a regular basis.
And by layoff, do you mean that people have, say, a contract, let's say it lasts for 6 months, and they're being let go before the end of that contract, or they're on like almost a week to week or a day to day employment arrangement, so they can be let go at will, as it were?
Yeah, actually, thank you for saying that, because it's both.
Mm.
There are people, especially at these kind of studios, these sort of VFX type places, there are people that at least believe that they have a more stable position there, and it tends to get renewed like maybe every 6 months, but they've been there for a few years, and so
Right.
they have a sense of security.
Mm-hmm.
And there's other people that the contracts go on a monthly basis, and I mean, I often see situations where it could be till the day before that contract ends
Mm.
before it's renewed.
Yeah.
And a lot of it's a very high stress thing, because a lot of these animators and artists, they don't know if in 2 days they have a job or not, and they don't know if they're supposed to be applying for another job
Mm.
because they're on this project. And increasingly,
Excuse
studios,
me,
yeah,
can I
yeah,
I have a question. When that happens,
yeah.
I can't think of an economic interest that the owners have in that situation. Do you think it's just because they want to fuck with people?
Yeah, well, I, I it's a really, I feel like it's partly that. I
Mm-hmm.
think a lot of these, the, the, at least the illusion, or the conversation among the artists that I've talked to that are in these kind of jobs, I think people feel or suspect that the studio is saving money, because then they don't have to pay vacations, they
Mm.
don't have to pay downtime between projects. So if there's like a couple weeks that there's no film that's
Mm.
coming, if it's just that space of a few weeks, they don't want to pay
Yeah.
a few weeks of salary, and they're not under any obligation to. And the nature of these contracts, I think, also allows them to navigate a space where they don't have to give, like, for some, depending on what your contract is, the people that are there longer term, there are some people that they do want to keep there, like let's say an animation director, they
Mm-hmm.
don't have to keep looking for a new animation director, so they
Mm-hmm.
might have a more stable contract. But then there's other people that this way they don't have to pay them overtime, they don't have to pay them um, holidays. There's a lot of
Yeah.
so I don't, ultimately it's true, because then I do wonder that, because then there's a constant, there are people that are there on more stable salaries, which would be maybe the like producers or the
Mm-hmm.
assistant producers that are constantly headhunting on
Mm-hmm.
LinkedIn or whatever
Mm-hmm.
to find people to replace all the people that just got laid off when they get another contract coming in, and then those people are getting, like, I don't know. So yeah, I honestly, I find
Well,
Marvel.
and we know, for example, from the data center mania that's occurring in the U.S. and some other places right now, that there is no, when we look for logical plans amongst capitalists, it's difficult. I mean, there are, of course, profit is always the goal, but then so there's the goal, but then their methodology for achieving that is not always what we would consider to be rational. Because power, I mean, Dennis, to your point, the exercise of power is a part of capitalist logic, right? Keeping your workers fearful is a part, because
Yeah, I think that's
it's a tyrannical system. So yeah.
And
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons they don't like people working at home.
Yeah. Yes.
They don't have them.
Absolutely.
They don't have them underfoot.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Like, reflecting on what you're both saying, when I look at the, like, I know I'll speak. I think that in terms of that kind of environment too, I'll speak to the Montreal industry, because you know how I was saying last time that we do produce a lot of animation here, and it is predominantly the video game and VFX work. But the way these studios operate, and because of this, we get these tax breaks in the province of Quebec that is incentive to do all of this 3D work, which ties in with which they finally announced on the government websites that it is for defense purposes, and tying in this research.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they sort of put something out there on the Canadian government website that the 3D industry is used for defense. Like, finally, when everyone was telling me that I was crazy for suspecting that. But which is why I suspected that we got all these tax breaks for it, because we weren't doing, last time we talked a bit about the pre-production process. We aren't doing pre-production so much in Montreal as we do the everything that is involved with the 3D software, like just the asset creation and then the animation itself, and that part of the production process. And then tied to this whole industry is like a rapid increase in I guess sorry, the word is eluding me, but these kind of more technical degree, like not a university degree, but these kind of technical 1-year programs, or
right, like the associate programs, for example. Yeah,
for 3D, like specifically for 3D animation, and they're not necessarily teaching any art or storytelling or any of that. They're just teaching 3D software, how to model in 3D, how to use the software, like all this. So there's a huge increase of investment in those programs, and in those programs, even the teachers, like, I remember I was asked to teach a drawing class in one of the programs that was hoping to be more like a Disney style of program or something, or they wanted to introduce some more creative aspects, but the drawing had to be limited to working in certain software programs. Like, you couldn't draw on paper, or you couldn't. So there's this technical school push that that now, you've got probably tens of thousands of graduates every year looking for jobs within just even the Montreal Circle alone. And then what I've witnessed so coming back to even how these studios would work, and a little bit again, maybe to I believe I brought this up in the last conversation, but to call back to this tier or generation of artists, quote unquote, or directors in the industry that exploit the labor of other artists. These people come into these kind of spaces, and then because there's all these students that are hungry, people that have more experience are now competing with students that are willing to work for free. And then these I don't know, artist exploiters, this group of people, they also offer, like, for example, let's say they worked at a major, I don't want anyone to identify that I'm pointing a finger at them, but let's just create a scenario where they come from a major LA studio, like one of the elitist studios that we all work in. They bring that credential with them, and then they're positioned at one of these houses, and all of these young, hungry students want to work there. And then because there's no unions here, there's none of that. Some of these people are being offered less than minimum wage, or that this director person, because they do online teaching or something, they say, oh, you could have access to some of my online courses for free, and then that is payment, and they lower the expense budget of what it is required to hire animators on these projects. And because by the time that people get to a space where they're like, I can't pay for a living or leave my parents' home, like living like this, there's a whole another group of like thousands of people graduating every year. So they exploit that whole situation. And I do think, like, I think there's a bit of the ideological side to it, but
Mm-hmm.
there's certainly some kind of a cost saving.
Yes.
Or if there isn't, like, other thing, I think that in certain, unfortunately, and this isn't for all of them, but there are also things where there's the issue with producers versus artists, because
Mm-hmm.
there's some studios, for example, producers are promised that if they can talk down someone's salary,
Yeah.
they get the difference for the
Yes.
first year to
Yeah.
take home. And then additionally, there's project budgets
Yes.
that the producers collectively get to divide what is left on that project budget. So if they can not pay overtime, or um,
Mm-hmm.
have ways of reducing the production costs that end up exploiting, say, the animators, or whatever, they get to take home whatever
Mm-hmm.
is left over. And I've even encountered that when I was brought on to consult on projects, because I do remember there was one project that, I think I said this last time, like sometimes I get brought on to fix things that
Yes.
are at a desperate
Yes.
state. And there was one project where I was like, I'm not going down with this ship. Like you brought me
Mm-hmm.
in late, like I can't.
Mm-hmm.
And they were willing to triple my rate without a heartbeat. Like they just threw that money out at me. So I felt like I kind of became aware that they have a pool of money that's sitting
Yes.
there that they're not willing to share unless it's so desperate. And that's horrible. But again, that it's and the producers serve that role. I don't want to. It's not the producers that conceived of this model, but this seems to be a model or a structure that happens. And so the artist labor, especially in the production stage of animation, is heavily exploited. And
Yeah.
sorry, I feel like I've derailed a little bit, but I'm
Well,
not
I don't
sure.
think you have, and I think what you're describing in is an accelerated version of uh, what Marx gets at when he describes the labor theory of value, right? But also the structure of the exploitation of labor. Um, and we can be certain that what studios have done and what the people who own these production houses have done, I would be shocked if they did not have specialized software that allowed them to create what would be the equivalent, like what in an insurance company would be an actuarial, table or actuarial software, some equivalent that allows them to calculate, how they can maximize profit, but also their personal takings, because it's not simply a matter of the organization's profit, but it's a cutthroat business, right? So people want to maximize their personal taking, particularly since, as I think Brad Pitt once said, I asked for 40 million because one day you're not going to want me. So if I can get that money, I'm going to take it. So it's a piratical ethos as well. I am certain that, in addition to the overall, because everything that you're describing is typical of all manifestations of capitalism. Even if it's a company making um, paper clips, not glamorous at all. But however, the exact same logics apply. This is one of the beautiful things about having like an actual in-depth Marxist analysis, is that you can see this. Like the moment you hear something like what you just said, you immediately see the structure and the superstructure. But that aside, in the particular case of the entertainment industry, even though we can't perceive it because we're not looking at the numbers, we're not sitting in the rooms with the CFOs, the finance people, and the accountants, we can be 100% certain, we can reverse engineer what you just described to know that they have a methodology that enables them to say, either the organization, as a whole, and or I as, Freddie,
Yeah.
will make extra money, because um, of playing these games, and also will keep labor off balance.
Mhm. Yeah, I thought that seems to be the perfect description of what it is. And I'm sure I'm sure every industry has their ways of creating the narratives that
Mm.
can uphold this. Um, but certainly in like what I witness is throughout at least the artistic chain, whether it's the directors that are exploiting their fellow animators, or it's the people all the way at the bottom. There is this like this is also this kind of ego driven, or what's the word I'm looking for, like meritocracy mythology, that like you're supposed to be super passionate. Like it's not about money, it's about how passionate you are. If you're not working overtime to make your scene perfect, even if they're not paying you for it, you're not a real artist, you're not a real animator. And then that narrative is very perpetuated, and then people that are being exploited themselves, that are stressed about, they don't know if they're going to in a month or have a contract.
Yeah.
Those same people defend the situation. You know,
Yes.
they protect it, and they refuse to challenge it.
Yes.
They refuse to ban, to, you know, that we have tried. Like there have
Yes.
been random artists of us that have tried to create some kind of a union,
Yes.
bring awareness to this, and it gets very quickly rejected because everybody doesn't want to lose their they don't want to lose any reputational status that they might
Yes.
have with the studio or something.
And the same structure, the same ideological structure pertains in tech. You know, the idea that, oh, well, you know, you're working for the greater good. We're doing exciting, quote unquote, innovative things. You know, how dare you, ask for anything, and you're not, you're not a worker. You're a professional. So there's no reason for you to be in a union. Union is for truck drivers and, you know, people like that. Not for you. It is an astounding ideological victory. That that the capitalists have won in this case.
And we play and I see it played out. Like, and I feel like even before I had a more Marxist awareness, because the spaces I was in, this was not an exposure that I had, or the education that I had when I was initially in this industry. But um, you it would always bother me. I remember being on panels at conferences where I would be there as like a Disney director, and someone else was there from different studios, and you just see these other people that we're all supposed to be there on this panel as people that have a certain status, or to give advice to other people, to aspiring artists. And all of these people would just constantly say to them, like, if you're not working until 2 a.m, you're not a real artist. And the studio didn't tell them to say that. It's this idea that they have. And I just remember thinking, like, I'm here on the panel with you.
Yes.
We're all artistically at least at a fairly equal level. I've accomplished as much as you have in your career.
Yes.
And I don't believe in that.
Yes.
Like, and that didn't serve me. But
exactly.
they perpetuate that narrative. And I remember, like, even when I would be on panels, because I would speak up about that, I would speak up and say that's not necessary, and you don't need to be working till 2 a.m. to prove that you are an artist, or any of these things. And the hostility that I would get for making a comment like that, either from the people I was sitting with, or even these younger aspiring artists that would make it seem like I was trying to cheat them by saying something that it's phenomenal, like the way that narratives can really support they're just not, I don't know, it's baffling to me that these narratives just are not checked.
I mean, what you're saying, I'm sorry.
There are other examples of, you're talking about this encouragement of working around the clock. There are other examples of things that you're supposed to sacrifice. So I had a client once in my old job who worked for Disney on the corporate side. He was a finance guy. And he got into a little trouble. It wasn't terrible, but it would have been embarrassing. It was a DUI. And that resulted in a fender bender. So anyway, he was on his way up the corporate ladder at Disney. And our main goal, apart from just minimizing the damage, was to keep it away from the people he worked with. I forget, there was one person he trusted, I think. That was his main concern, was that nobody knew. And so anyway, my old job was to talk to people and get their deep background, their life story, and then present that as this is an anomaly. We weren't always able to do that. But, in this case, yeah, this guy was, he was just uncareful. And in Santa Monica, which we were talking about earlier, so which means a small town, basically, Santa Monica. So anyway, he had this problem. Anyway, so he's telling me stories just about his life and his work world and stuff. And there was one anecdote he told me about this woman that he worked with who became pregnant. And she tried to keep it, just as he tried to keep his DUI from his superiors. She tried to keep her pregnancy. And she did for as long as she could. And then when they found out about it, they let her go. And she was telling him about this. And he kind of teared up a little bit. And African-American guy. So he felt a kinship with her as to, what things you have to do to survive. And she said, "Whoa, don't do that. Don't let him see you cry, I mean, she meant it literally. Do not let him see you cry."
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And this is a woman who was just laid off because she was bringing life into the world.
It's astounding. And you would think that, people were like, I don't know, Roman senators or something, waiting for the knife, or gladiators. And I think that the comparison is apt. Marx talked about vampires, right? On the system being vampiric, and this is why, because it's stealing our life. And Samantha, I for the audience, I want to emphasize the fact that in addition to talking about the layoffs, the conditions of the layoffs, and then you'll get into the history of layoffs as well. And oh, by the way, to answer, I think, a question that was posed earlier, I believe the reason why the 2026 layoff rounds have received international press is that Disney used the excuse of AI, and so all you have to do is sprinkle that into your story, and then it'll get covered everywhere because it helps Microsoft, helps Amazon, helps Google, helps OpenAI, Anthropic, and other villains. And so I think that's one of the reasons, and also because people think of Disney as being impregnable or like a safe bet. But one of the things I want people to keep in mind as you talk about this is that this is how the sausage is made, right? That you have things that you love to see, but behind the scenes, there are people laboring. OpenAI released Sora a little while ago, like a couple of years ago, and Sora was supposed to eliminate the need for people to make films. It failed, of course, because it's generative AI slop, and you can't actually script a film, and you can't expect the software to produce what you really want the way you could with people working on a film, and whether it's animated or live action. But the dream was no longer having to be bothered with people making films of any sort. And actually, Samantha, I in the course of what you're telling us, I would be curious to get your thoughts about Disney and other studios' efforts to replace people with software, and the steps or efforts that they've made to try to remove labor from the life cycle, and how much money they've spent on trying to achieve this, and the damage that it's doing to the entertainment industry in the U.S. overall, which is duller, dumber, just overall of lower quality than it was even, say, 2 years ago. I would say.
Yeah. I mean, the way that when I look at the history of it, even before we got into what is now considered like CG, computer graphic, 3D animation, these things were starting with like the coloring process, right? That we used to have ink, like there was the ink and paint, the one department that women were allowed to work in at Disney, like the ink and paint department, where they would say color in the cells, right? You'd paint by hand, like.
Is that because now we know the reason why they were relegated or isolated was sexism or misogyny, to be more precise. But is it also the case that perhaps women were better at that work, at that detail work in, say, 1930s and 40s?
I mean, it's possible, because it's hard. I've never really studied the history of because we do see that traditionally and culturally that, just women doing very intricate work and just, even just having smaller hands,
there's that.
I mean, I say that because both my parents were surgeons and my mom has very small hands. And I know that they talked about that, like being an asset. So that is possible. But on the other hand, oh yeah.
Can I read one thing here quickly? This is from something that we'll talk a little bit about later. This is I'm reading from a catalog of an exhibit I saw recently, Walt Disney and World War II. And this is at the Holocaust Museum in Dallas. So anyway, they were talking about during the war. And they were talking about women, exactly what you were just talking about. Then, because the film industry had the same problem as all other industries, the men were gone to fight. So ads were placed in local papers, and this is quoting the ad. Do you want a career in art? Walt Disney needs young women who have had training in pen and ink work now! Exclamation point. A real opportunity for the girl who excels. That's the end. Those who qualified for work were quickly trained on the job. The ink and paint department shifted to a 48-hour, 6-day work week and expanded its training program. With new trainees enlisted at the studios, many skilled female artists were given the opportunity to move into different departments. By March 1945, 81 women were working in the animation building as in-betweeners or assistant animators. So they could do it, couldn't they? Pardon me?
The assistant animator work is I would say it's sort of where the upgrade is, because the ink and paint, it's not to disparage it, or I don't mean it like that, but Disney, this is the misogyny of it, because doing the ink and paint work it was like a paint by numbers thing. It's like you get the cells and the drawing is on the cell already, and you just color in the blue of the dress or the whatever, you had, and that would be, so Disney wouldn't allow them the positions that would mean that you made creative decisions, you didn't get to choose how the character was drawn in the scene, or you didn't get to, it was just paint, coloring it with predetermined, colors, and they weren't painting the backgrounds, right? That wasn't offered to them. It was just the coloring in of the frames. I don't know if that makes sense, or if people know what I mean with the cell thing, but the
well, I can include a link to some visual examples for people.
It's probably old school now, but and a lot of depending on the era, because I don't know if people, sorry, this is a little bit of a side thing, but there were budgetary from the history that I learned from the inside. So I'll just say that, but there were restraints, I guess, in budgets, or at least that's what was told to us. And so there was that period, I don't know if people remember the styles of like Robin Hood, Jungle Book, 101 Dalmatians. They had a sort of black outline, sketchy style.
And that was the 1960s style that you may recall.
Even into the 70s as well. I think up until really almost up until the new generation of like, because the turnover happened in the late 70s when the nine old men kind of retired, and then the 80s sort of got a little was sort of a bit of a teething area. But if you think of a film like the earlier ones, like Sleeping Beauty, for example, the outlines of the characters were very precisely done, the cleanup drawing, and they were all like in color as well. So it wasn't just black ink. Whereas that era of Dalmatians and Robin Hood, they were actually Xeroxing the rough animation drawings onto the cell. And that's why they also have those sketchy lines. So they sort of took out the cleanup art, the inking process. And so they just had that. And then those would just get like colored in and painted.
So that was an earlier attempt to industrialize the process.
Yeah, actually, yeah. And so sorry, I had a reason for going into that, but I guess all that to say is that the ink and paint department was really just like a coloring book. Eventually there were some women that you see in the credits. There were some women that did get assistant animation work, and there was a woman, Mary Blair, who had done a lot of concept art or visual development illustrations, and she's sort of credited for the look of, like, if people remember how Alice in Wonderland looked, or Peter Pan or Cinderella, that period had a certain style, and that was Mary Blair. And she was I actually have to look more into the specifics of that history, but she was the only woman that really was given some creative freedom at Disney, and significant creative freedom, because she would create these concept art pieces that had an influence on the art style. But otherwise, the ink and paint girls were just kind of that. It was sort of like the industrialized part. And most likely, again, I don't know the whole process, but most likely there would be one woman that had the blue paint that would just do the blue on one cell, pass it, like, and pass it on and do the blue. And another woman had the white paint, and another woman had the, green paint or the yellow paint. And so the cells would just probably go through a production factory line of how they were painted. But coming back to the detail work, like the hand thing, sorry, my brain is jumping around. But animation itself, especially with that era, with the nine old men, the work itself required a lot of control and precision. Like, that's something that it's, even with rough animation, there's been a kind of, even within the industry sometimes, or people that have not worked at Disney but that look at Disney animators and aspire to their work, they might see rough drawings, like especially one animator that was prominent in the like late 80s, 90s, like in this Renaissance period. His name was Glenn Keane, and he was sort of notoriously famous for doing these really gestural, rough, messy kind of drawings. But even if you work that way for your initial animation pass, because we usually do, I mean, I don't know, I don't want to go into the weeds too much unless people are interested, but we usually do a rough pass, and then we'll do what we call a tie down pass. And then the tie down, depending on, how you are and how you care about the person that has to clean up or ink your drawings, you would want to control your tie down enough so that they're not guessing where to put the final line. And a lot of the work that the nine old men did in that generation, they were very they were loose in their first rough pass, but then they would do a tie down pass that was very controlled, because if there was a different cleanup artist, they didn't want the work to change on the screen, that it would look different, or the character might look a little different. They wanted to control, and that was sort of a philosophy that I took to heart, because we were told, that you have a responsibility to make sure it's your work on the screen, and that someone is picking where the line is. So all of that to say is that it did require a lot of precision work,
Yes.
and probably more precision work even than or detailed controlled work than the painting of the cells might require. So
Yeah. And
uh,
let's tie this back into where we started earlier, because I'm listening to you describe the artisanal work, if I may use that term, that would go into the creation of the animation, right? Um, well, this is the sort of thing that a business owner hates, right? I mean,
mm,
what would you, if you are the owner of the corporation, you despise the fact that A, you cannot do it because, these people tend to be megalomaniacal in many ways. But also, this means that you have to pay people and pay people a lot. And then the longer they stay, because you were talking about how precarious the labor is, the longer you stay and you're a highly skilled artist and you have longevity, you have institutional knowledge, the longer you stay, the more difficult it is for them to get rid of you without disrupting the production of product. Henry Ford created. People celebrate the creation of the assembly line, and yes, it was. And I don't know if Ford. I don't believe Ford actually created, but in any event, let's give him some credit. People give Ford credit for the assembly line for the construction of automobiles because, of course, prior to that, prior to the Ford assembly line, the manufacture of automobiles was artisanal. And so every car is custom made and so forth. And shops, no doubt, standardized things, but it was still highly skilled workers producing these early autos, which means they had to be well paid. And so Ford said, well, I can get rid of that. In the beginning, of course, he was paying his workers well because he understood, in his addled Nazi brain, he understood
mm,
that, they have to be able to buy the product. So he at least he got that part right. But bringing it back to Disney and the entertainment industry overall, of course, a person who's looking to maximize their profit, and as we said earlier, their personal take and the organization's take, would look upon everything that you described with contempt because all they see are zeros going in the wrong direction, out.
that's no, and it's so fascinating that you're saying that though, because I'm reflecting on the time that I got into the industry. And so, I mentioned this person, Glenn Keane, and other artists of that generation were people like Andreas Deja,
Mm.
who did Scar and Jafar and these,
Mm-hmm.
characters, and Eric Goldberg. And I'm saying those names, like, so there were these prominent names in the Renaissance period that were these Disney artists. Um, I don't know their whole, I guess, like I don't know exactly what their salaries are, but I'm
Mm-hmm.
aware that it was somewhere in the millions and millions and millions kind of
Right,
thing.
right.
And they had these lifetime contracts that were solidified, before like any of these like new turnovers were happening at the company, like the turnovers with like Eisner and Katzenberg and like different artists.
Mm-hmm.
And um and so I think what was like it's just interesting to me because as it moved into 3D, a lot of these like a certain group that was very prestigious and foundational in the renaissance of Disney, this group started like they didn't want to transition into 3D. They didn't want to learn a whole new craft and they didn't want to do things differently. So Disney was finding ways to get them to still contribute to the projects and still being there. And so it was interesting because we had oh sorry, I think my camera's anyway, I know it's an audio thing. I'll figure that out after I finish saying this point. But we there they would create this sort of role where they would do draw over work, which was very helpful to create a certain quality of 3D animation where we would do
Mm-hmm.
drawings on top of it. But it was interesting because I think Eric Goldberg was one of the last of that generation to still be at Disney up until a few years ago,
Mm-hmm.
maybe Wreck-It Ralph might have been one of the last
Hmm.
that he was on, but they moved him down to the basement. He was eventually being moved
Oh,
down to the basement and put into a room where all of the trainees would be, or that would come in, and then he would do these drawovers on the film, but he'd not really be related to the rest of the project. And it was just very,
hmm.
anyway. Sorry, it makes me think of that because there were some people that had a certain position that, like you're saying, like
Yes.
they were secure enough that they could not be removed from the company, but then their purpose there became like
But you
some of
want
them just
to,
decided to retire early. They just
yes,
decided they don't want to.
because of course you the desire then is to punish them or to make the
Mhm.
working conditions, and this is another maneuver. You make the working conditions unpleasant, right? Because when you achieve a certain level of seniority, it's only natural for human beings to expect. I mean, even if you're not, say, like like a haughty bastard, but you would expect,
Mhm.
a certain level of respect, right? And even if you want to be a mentor to others, to younger workers, but the organization, the owners of the organization, don't want that. What they want is for you to be put in your place, and so they can pay you a lot of money if necessary, but that also becomes a liability to them, right? Because that's from their perspective, that's money that belongs to them. It doesn't belong to you, and it doesn't matter that you've actually produced, the effort.
Well, I think
Yeah.
that's also too, Dwayne. You always talk about they despise competence.
Yes.
So somebody who's been doing it for decades, and then some youngster comes in and is going to reorganize and turn the finances upside down. It's just like you're just some old guy who
Mm-hmm.
is in my way, and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, in the Hollywood movies, those young whippersnappers always get their comeuppance, but in real life, they get promoted.
It doesn't happen that way.
You know?
Oh,
Yeah.
Mhm.
yeah. So, and actually, we had a technical glitch. So, if this seems a bit disjointed, because I had to edit out um, the technical interruption, that's the reason. But before that technical glitch, Samantha, you were talking about a gentleman who had worked for Disney for quite some time and was a celebrated animator who found himself in literally the basement. I'm guessing. Huh?
Yes, yeah, like where so they have a room where you know and his office was that intern, like the space that
Mm-hmm.
you work in, which is
Mm-hmm.
quite disassociated from main production.
Yes.
And this this generate like these sort of Disney veterans that had these secure positions at Disney because they contributed significantly to these were the celebrated animators time in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
Eric Goldberg, who I'm referring to, he's the one that did the Aladdin.
Ah.
He created Phil in Goat King Kai.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, so and so the people that had, I think, different contracts that were the people that created the iconic um, Disney. It was interesting because I like again I don't want to speak too much for what their experience was because I don't know all of it per se, but just being friends and knowing, like, being colleagues with them and speaking with them, like it seemed to be an interesting thing where there just wasn't much for them to do. And I know that Andreas had disclosed that, and I think he's spoken about this as well, but it just got to a point where there wasn't really anything for them to do at the studio, so he chose to leave. He wanted to have the freedom to work on his own projects that
Mm-hmm.
you're not allowed to,
Sure.
at Disney. And so it just kind of made me think of that dynamic. That obviously wasn't to everyone, but to what you were saying, there was no space left anymore
Mm-hmm.
for that type of role. Like if you were not part of the production line, and the studio had become much more siloed. Like I got, when I entered Disney, it was a very trying time, and I was still there at the beginning of my time at Disney, was still the remnants of that generation. And so the way that the studio structure was, it was a little bit more, I'm hesitant to say the word horizontal, but we were all there because we were well trained artists. Like we all drew. So no matter what department you were in, there was a fluidity among all of us, and we were all at drawing sessions together, and we would all be. There was still a bit of opportunity for artists to even present ideas, or to. We knew each other from different departments. As it moved more and more in production, the pre-production department, even the production department, know each other. So I would go back into, after I had left as a full-time employee, and I'd be going in for contract work or consulting to visit friends. And it was amazing to me because character designers, for example, did not know any animators. Like they just were in different departments and didn't know each other. Whereas in the hand drawing, the animators would also collaborate. Visual artists, we also helped.
And this gets us back to what we were talking about a little earlier, the Ford model, because of course in a Fordist production plant, one team might not immediately know another team, right? Each team, each unit of teams, or the division of labor, so this and the siloing of these areas of skill.
Yes, and that's what I've noticed is like even when I would go back in afterwards and just more like, because I would have further and further spaces away from being in Disney Studios if I was working in London, different things. And every time I went back in, it just seemed to be more siloed. And the friends of mine that were still there that I had originally worked with, people that so I would go and visit them, but then they didn't know any of the animators. They chose to keep drawing, and so they would be directing or storyboarding or something. The 3D animators were. That's not to say that people didn't become friends with each other or meet in studios, but it certainly wasn't like when I started. We all knew each other, and we'd all be in. All be. We were on different floors, so there definitely was a separation of departments, but it wasn't weird to be on another, like checking your artwork with somebody else's, or as an animator, I'd have to sometimes go to the background department and get a different grid, the perspective grid on the painting that they provided to me to animate on, because I didn't have a clear sense of the ground plane, or things like this, that we would just talk with each other, and that definitely progressively changed in the studio, and it is and then equally salary, salary for at least like overall have gone significantly down from what was offered to animators in the past.
Yeah.
Or animation artists. I'll just say like any artist in the department. So it's been there has been that kind of labor shift, and I'd still argue that Disney would still be one of the more sought after or in the industry, but even the style, like I'm sure, I think Pixar's maybe held on to this a little bit more, but we even see the like Disney films now, probably since we don't do there isn't like unique character or art direction anymore. They all look like, and what I mean by that is they all look like they be in the same world, like they're all dolls in the same universe. Whereas if you look at the older films, something like Beauty and the Beast would not match the style of Mulan or something. They existed in different artistic universes.
Right.
Whereas right now, like it's basically they hire, now what Disney does is they hire like costume designers, and so the artistic design process is almost predetermined by this Disney look. Like every film will just
Mm-hmm.
in the doll universe what
Mm-hmm.
Disney is, but they just each doll a bit like depending on where they situate the story, they'll have dolls that have like Mexican or um, you know, East Asian looks, or
Yeah,
like, but they all look like if they all ran into each other. If all these stories,
it
like if
wouldn't be
someone,
strange
it wouldn't, yeah,
visually, and
yeah,
this also, of course, is another bit of evidence that the goal, again, we can reverse engineer from the evidence presented to us, that the goal has been to create an industrial process. Because, of course, to return once again to Ford, right? I want to turn out a million Model Ts. Well, in the case of, say, Disney and other studios, um, the title of the film could be different, the story might be different, but we have now stock characters that we can draw upon, and this also, of course, makes the labor of skilled artists less valuable, because you could say, not only can I do this, through computer animation, perhaps, or to some extent. But even if I do use people, all they have to do is refer to this, generic style book, and then we can just, oh, I need a Mexican, and a space alien, and a black guy. Okay, well, now they're all together, and they all have the same bobbleheads, and they all have the same exact look, really.
yeah. You just change the features a little
Yeah,
bit to make them present themselves to be more
to be
of,
different in some
yeah,
way.
a look there.
And what do you think
Style.
about audiences? Because, use value and exchange value comes to mind. Now, with a car, if there's a million Model Ts, for example, or Ford Tauruses, going forward in time a bit, um, everybody can get, they get a different color, and but there's a use value for the vehicle, and it has an exchange value because of its use value. Um, with animation that looks interchangeable, do you think audiences at this stage are just accepting this, or do you think people are saying, well, I have to take my kids somewhere, or I want to get out of the house, or I need to rent something, to watch via Apple TV or what have you at home. So we need something to watch. Are they just accepting it because, you only have dirty water to drink, but you would prefer clean water, but you only have dirty water and you need water? Or is the audience being trained, do you believe, to just accept this this dulling?
Yeah, that's something I ask myself a lot because it's weird because I've never had an objective perspective in a sense,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and I know we touched on time, but I also never came from this Disney
Yes.
kind of obsession.
Yes.
So I think we do have audiences. Like I meet predominant, like I hate to say it, but predominantly white settler Americans that like, or
Mm-hmm.
liberal Americans that obsessed with anything. It's
Mm-hmm.
like a fan culture. Anything that comes out of Disney is just
Mm-hmm.
accepted, and it's almost like the way that people perceive like canon lore in
Mm-hmm.
culture or something.
Mm-hmm.
There's that acceptance, excited, and I have friends that I have a friend that I used to dance with in a ballet company that now she's not she's not working anymore, but she has her kids and they're obsessed with
Mm-hmm.
Disneyland. They love everything Disney, uncritically.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's not about the artwork; it's about the Disney,
Mm-hmm.
thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that there are those people. I've also through my career encountered are not really into Disney, but they do see that. They're like, well, it's nice that my kids appreciate that you work on these kind of things, or
Mm-hmm.
something like they.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's that too. Um, so it's so hard for me to really know because I've
Yeah.
seen those things, and when I see those like those two groups that I've described, I don't really think they seem to care about what is being
Yeah.
given to them. And then but then I also see things where 3D animation industry has like I mean, I just remember when I was growing up, there'd be like a Disney,
Mm-hmm.
or something, and maybe there was the a Don Bluth, movie. I
Mm-hmm.
remember like Anastasia came out with Don Bluth Fox. There'd be like maybe another animated film, but then as the 3D industry has really expanded, you've got so many studios now. Like they're not necessarily in the elite tier that
Mm-hmm.
I've referred to, but there's a large production now of animated feature films, and I do think that people recognize that some of these productions are just mediocre.
Yeah.
That
Mm-hmm.
so that part of me feels like people do appreciate or recognize a difference of the content coming out from, say, Disney and Pixar versus these kind of dime a dozen 3D
Mm-hmm.
animation features
Mm-hmm.
by random companies all over the
Mm-hmm.
or all over North America even.
Yes.
I'll just
You
so
know,
it's
I sometimes when I go out to eat or whatever, yeah, out to eat because this wouldn't happen in a bar because I'm talking about kids. Um, but I see families with young kids, and I mean, the adults might even be on their phones, but the kids have these little, I don't even know what kind of devices they are, but there's obviously, they're just being bombarded with various kinds of animation
Mhm.
at dinner, out, you know?
Yeah.
So I have a daughter, she's 26, and her mother and I were very careful about not doing that. So I don't want to judge people when I see them sitting and,
Mm-hmm.
maybe they're tired, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
All I'm saying is the ability to do that
Yes.
bothers me. You know
Yes.
what I mean? Because people will do. It's just like staring at TV.
Yes.
It's like staring at a fire. People people will do something like that if it's available. And so then that makes me think: what are these kids?
Yes.
What is their bar that they compare things against? Or do they? Is there any differentiation at all? Is it all one
Yeah. Well, and
big
also,
thing?
I
well,
mean,
and the fact that the history is being cut off because in the past, a younger person um, could reference work of the past and do a comparison to the present. This is how one of the things that Turner Classic Movies discovered over time was that, contrary to their expectation, a large percentage of their audience was like under the age of, say, 40, maybe even under the age of 30, because there's just many young people who had grown to love, what we now call classic American film. And also, and as I've mentioned to you, Dennis, many times, when Turner Classic Movies came out in the 90s, it was like a film education because Robert Osborne, would explain, the host would explain and so over time I began to realize I'm actually getting a history of film. Like they're not just quote unquote showing old movies. They're telling you the story of American film through this medium. So as a younger person, because I wasn't around for Casablanca, for God's sake, but yet I knew about it, and I'd grown to love it, or I'd grown to love Robert Mitchum in 1947's Out of the Past, even though it was before my time. I think that today many young people are cut off from the cultural history, and so if all they get is slop, and then even though on YouTube there's many things are available, but the algorithm, YouTube's tagging system doesn't necessarily push things in your direction that might be helpful to you, and unless you know people who recommend things, there's no way for you to know, so you're just caught in this loop, like this spiral of the present. And if the present is slop, that may be all you know. And if the educational system isn't introducing you, because as we know in the U.S., the educational system is being dismantled um, um, at pace, which of course is what fascists do. Um, uh, the danger is that young people will be trapped, in a forever present, in which they don't know that there were greater works or greater skill exhibited in the past.
I think that that's something that concerns me a lot. Is that there's a few things actually that concern me about all of this. One is the colonization,
Mm.
the points of reference, the way of how we're, like, even just as artists or artists,
Mm-hmm.
imagine
Mm-hmm.
is being funneled into this type of synthetic. And the other thing that concerns me though is that because I look at education models that in settler colonies, like in
Mm-hmm.
Canada too, and something that I started recognizing in a lot of these films, like it really just the first time it really opened my eyes to Luca.
Mm.
But then again with K-pop Demon Hunters that achieved a lot of success in the last year is films actually are what I've like they are ideologically targeting
Mm-hmm.
to embrace and accept genocide.
Mm. Mm.
And all of these Luca, K-pop Demon Hunters, they're all about normalizing the othering of an indigenous acceptable them to protect space.
Yes.
They did that also with another film called Nimona on Netflix.
Mm-hmm.
And but I started like these themes are being repeated at an increased level right now in children's shows, especially in the last 15, 20 years. Children's films in particular, but it's there in the shows too. Like, I mean, yes. I have a friend that works in children's television, so she has children, so she points out to me a lot. Like, I don't watch the children's television programming as much, but I do know there's like the Paw Patrol thing. Just got this little Elon Musk kid that runs a bunch of paratrooper dogs, basically. So there's these kind of normalizations happening, but in the feature film space that I can speak to, not only are we seeing these themes in the VFX blockbuster, but they are specifically embedded themes and narratives that are being repeated, and it concerns me because I look at, like, I was listening to, there's this incredible educator from Kenya, channel called YouTube, and I'm listening to her talking about this PE program, the competition program in adopting. I started looking into that, and I started seeing how Canada and Israel also have this CBE program or whatever. And it just, when I listen to also people that are disclosing how they train in and the education process, these are certain techniques that are being put out in the animated films that are being produced by a lot of studios. And I think that that's also a thing that's very scary because, again, it's and again, like it's I don't like what you said, Dennis. It's not to put blame on parents that are trying to survive a capitalist system and manage raising a family and managing their jobs, but the ease at which it has been made available to give children access to immerse themselves in these stories is very, I think, concerning.
Me too, because I said earlier that we were careful to try and stay away from that as much as possible. But there are so many more devices available now, and they're cheaper.
Yes.
And she's 26, so we're just talking about 25 years ago. It was sort of a desert in terms of the things I see now that kids have available, and I'm sure they don't cost that much. And and as somebody who has raised a kid, I know that there are times when I'm just like, go watch TV, please, or just the old joke is go out and play in traffic, anything, just get away from me. So I can, that's what I'm saying. And so the availability is what capitalism.
And that's what that is what is called a loss leader in business. Amazon did this to establish itself. Uber did this to establish itself. And what I mean is, you sell cheap to proliferate. And then once you have market saturation, then you can increase prices or you can upsell.
Like Google.
Precisely, yes, precisely,
Okay.
right. But a couple of things I wanted to get to before we close. One is that I want the audience to know that Samantha has compiled a list of previous layoffs in the history of the Disney organization, so that you will know that, contrary to what the media is saying, this is not an unprecedented event. And as Samantha has been detailing and laying out, it is part of a business strategy. In recent days, AI has been used, so-called AI, has been used to, as a cover, but it's a long-standing business strategy. But I also wanted, Dennis, I think that you wanted to kind of tie things in together with the exhibit that you went to, and then also, I believe, as I recall, How to Read Donald Duck, which we discussed a bit in the previous episode. But why don't you start with the description of the exhibit, and your thoughts about that?
Yeah, where are we with time about, because
Well,
I'm starting to think that I would rather talk about right now this exhibition,
Yeah.
but also, and then, and I was thinking maybe I could write a review for
Oh, well, yes.
rare degree for Donald Duck.
That would be
But
fantastic.
I mean, but we can. Well, let's see where it goes. So yeah, this is just a couple of weeks ago. I was in Dallas, and I have a friend who works in a museum in Los Angeles, and every once in a while they send people out to different parts of the country to look at, like what other museums are doing. So she was doing this in Dallas, and I joined her there, and went on this like whirlwind museum visits, several museums in the Dallas Fort Worth area, and one of them was the JFK, the Book Depository Museum. You familiar with that?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the Book Depository was where Lee Harvey Oswald was employed
Mm-hmm.
and had access to, and the sixth floor of that building is where he shot. Shots were fired from there, and then whatever else you want to think about what else happened. And so that entire building has been turned into a museum. And on the sixth floor, the corner window where he had set up, they've recreated, because there were a gazillion photographs taken, and that was I really liked that. But then across the street from there was the Dallas Holocaust Museum, and it was closed that day. And I shared a picture of this, ad for it was called the Walt Disney Studios and World War II. And I bought the catalog and the little booklet. It's presented by the Walt Disney Family Museum, and the cover it was in Dallas. So the cover has the Texas state flag, Donald Duck hanging off of the fuselage, I think it's called, of an airplane. Anyway, so I sent you guys, I said, hey, and I think it was Dwayne said, hey, we could talk about that. And I'm like, okay, well, I'll go. And I'm glad I did. It was the first Holocaust museum I've ever visited. You guys ever been to a Holocaust museum?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I haven't. I never been to one. I'm assuming they're all, obviously the focus is the same.
Mm-hmm. Pretty much.
But it was so weird. There was this boxcar, a genuine boxcar used by the Nazis to transport people to the camps.
Yeah, typically you'll have artifacts like that. Yeah, in these museums.
Well, I wasn't surprised that was there. What surprised me was the way it was sort of presented as, this is like the first boxcar west of the Mississippi or something. It was like this was a find for the Dallas Holocaust Museum. It was, as if it was some kind of rare Picasso or something. Weird. Also weird, I visited probably 6 museums over a course of 3 days, and the Holocaust Museum had a metal detector, and it was the only one.
Interesting.
And it was interesting because it's, those things aren't very. I mean, it's touch and go. I mean, I've talked about my profession, which entailed a lot of visits to see people in jails and prisons locked up, and so after 9/11, just like in the airport, security measures changed, but over time they kind of loosened because in Los Angeles, there's the criminal courts building downtown where OJ was tried. And it's probably the busiest single courtroom in the country. There's no way they can make people take off their shoes and their belts and empty their pockets, et cetera, et cetera. So it's just jump, 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 jump. And then you go a couple of blocks away to a federal courthouse where the judges there hear 2 or 3 cases a day. It's a very high life, those federal judges. And so, and they build these gigantic courthouses that look like modern art museums. I mean, I swear, if I was in one of these, and there are many stories told, and I looked down, like in the, what do you call the thing in the center, the atrium?
Yes.
Is that what it's called? I've looked down there, and I was thinking, if I'm a criminal defendant and I'm about to go into court, this is not the kind of environment that makes me feel like judgment is going to happen here. This makes me want to jump. It's not. There's no wood. There's no blood, sweat, and tears. In this building. Anyway, long story short, so it's a very empty building most of the time, but you got like 9 guys, usually guys, security. And so you have to take off your shoes and blah, 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 it's just, all the security stuff just depends, So the Dallas Holocaust Museum has a metal detector, which is probably not even turned on, but it's there. So anyway, let me jump to some stuff. I had a couple of names. You were mentioning a woman's name earlier, Samantha. Have you heard of Retta Scott? How about Wooly Reitherman?
Oh yeah, Wooly Reitherman. Yes,
yeah. Oh, look at you light up.
Yeah.
He's one of the 9 old men, right? That you keep talking about.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Okay, so this is like the curator's note, and he's talking about, because last week we talked about how the Disney people no one knew their names because it was like this wall. So this guy talks about going through stuff that he hadn't seen before. It was a real surprise to find the mock-up pages for Be First, a children's story about a new fighter written and illustrated by Disney legends Retta Scott and Wooly Reitherman. And I read that and I thought, okay, legend, that means, that everybody's heard of them, right? And then I thought, well, but that's what we were talking about. Nobody's heard of them, and I hadn't heard of these people. And then I noticed, I read it again, and it's Legends is capitalized. So Disney Legends is like this private Hall of Fame.
Yes.
This private Disney Hall of Fame. And I think even the induction ceremonies were closed to the public for the first 25 years or so that this thing was in existence. So it's another sort of the secret, world of Disney where it's like it's kind of cultish,
Well, it is though, because I knew these, we knew these stories, and that's also why, now that I reflect back on, and sort of tying into what we were talking about, before we came on about LA, when you're, I think a cult is a good way to describe it. When you're in the cult, you actually don't know about the world outside the cult.
That's right.
We don't. So I knew who all these artists were, and we had access to all these archive things that were not available to the public. Even just things like animation lessons, reels, which has led me to reflect on a lot of things, because I think not just like Disney, but there's probably a lot of state or something institutions that I think get underestimated when I hear conversations about the anti-imperial critical. I don't consider that there might be university academies and training centers in that are not with what people have access to on the outside. Disney like that, most of our film education, like even my supervisor for my PhD was like, why don't you break down like 6 of the top industry books?
Mm.
And I was like, they're not, I can't even find 6 because all
Yes.
my notes, like they
Yes.
were all taken from, and we had so much schooling internally that, so I think that, yeah, it is a little, it's interesting like that because we knew about them inside, but
Yes.
they're not there.
And this makes perfect sense because this is proprietary knowledge. Like, for example, AT&T Labs, right? Were you to go through the archives of AT&T, there's quite a few. There's lots of technical data, lots of information, many things that found their way into products. Some things that are only for the military, and so did not find themselves into commercial. But I'm sure there's a treasure trove. Well, I know, there's a treasure trove of information that has not seen the light of day outside of the organization. So, from Disney's perspective, all of this are trade secrets because what's the product? The product is this entertainment and
Well,
entertainment at a
and
certain level.
it's also protecting your image or controlling your image
Mm-hmm,
as much as
mm-hmm.
possible.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, to create an air of mystery.
And just sort of, I'm just, again, I don't know if this is the case or not, but just too, I'm just thinking now about how siloed and how the contracts become, like the labor, 1-year contract or something, but also that person that works a year is not as trained or in the way that we use it. And I'm not trying to discredit like their caliber because it's still very competitive and all that stuff, but they don't have that range or that the full skills, I guess, that we were being trained in. So I guess that also gives permission for Disney to not be as like needing to keep them locked in house as much as serving.
Now we're past the hour mark because we had a bit of a technical hiccup, and here in Northern Europe, it's getting late. Um, um, I'm thinking now. I'm thinking on my feet because I think that we've dived or dove. I never get that right. We we dived. I think much more
Divin,
deeply.
I think we've divin.
I will take it into the topic, and I will add more things into the show notes. And I don't want to. Well, how to put this? We could have 10 episodes on the structure of Disney. But what I would like to invite you to do, Samantha, is actually write at your leisure, write an essay that we would then publish on our website so that things that may be missed or things that people want to have a bit more information about, that could be referenced within the essay or article, if you will. Because in our next episode, I would like us to actually dive into some other aspect of film. We need to get our heads together and decide what that's going to be. We won't do it in the open forum, but in our little conversations, our film conversations, we'll decide what that would be because my God, there's so much to cover. And actually beyond Disney, because I think that the theme of, or rather, an investigation into the industrialization of the film process in the modern era, in the 21st century, the steel system of the 20th century, mid 20th century, that was a factory process as well. But I know Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer and Warner's, and they had a different way of achieving their goals they tried to achieve an industrialization, but still there was some sense of artistry, I would say, some allegiance, because I think the understanding was that we had to make a decent product, for the audience to come and see it.
I'm saying this again a little naively, but I do appreciation, even if maybe that was part.
You know what? When Orson Welles made Citizen Kane, and he did so using sleight of hand and all sorts of tricks that he did to get the studio bosses to come into the studio, think he was making one movie when he was really making another. And then Citizen Kane was released, and it did not do well in the box office. Surprise, surprise, because it's a very complicated film and quite dark. And RKO's ad campaign after Kane was what was it? Showmanship, not genius. I believe that was the term that they used. And what they were telling the audience was, and also their stakeholders, was, yes, we indulge this boy genius, this Orson Welles, and forgive us, because going forward, we're just going to make rip-roaring tales that the audience loves. However, within those constraints, they did allow and enable a certain degree of creativity. This is why you got film noir, for example. This is why you got a Douglas Sirk. This is why you got certain kinds of people who, and even John Ford, who, although he, to his dying day, denied that he was had any kind of vision of filmmaking, because he was a bit of a crusty bastard. But clearly he did have a vision of filmmaking. And I'm not saying that it was good in terms of its moral characters or ideology, but as a filmmaker, he had a vision of what he wanted to do. And so I think that those old studio bosses of the 30s, 40s, 50s, and of course that died in the 60s, the system, I think those studio bosses were, let's just say, tolerant of artistic intent, so long as the entertainment value was present and they could get asses in seats. But today, I think that because you no longer have a generation of people who grew up exposed to certain arts, because you could be like a Warner, right? And maybe you were a Philistine, but you would have been exposed to certain things. But now we have a generation of people from the tech industry, for example, they're all Philistines, and they've been exposed to nothing. So they have no artistic background, no sense. They're all profit, and so whatever is required to produce the profit is all that they're interested in. I say all that to say that what we've explored here, the theme of industrialization, I think is something that we can carry forward. But one of the other things we want to do here is also look back to some of the films that we admire from the past. And one of the other projects, and this is for the audience, I'd like us to dive into is there's a series called The Story of Film in Odyssey from, I forget his name, Cousins, I believe is the name of the documentarian. It's a fantastic series that gives you a history of cinema from this person's perspective. I bring that up. There are many other things that we can talk about. We'll get it all together. But so for now, I will bid everyone adieu as I drift off to slumberland. And for Film Conversations, I'm Dwayne Monroe with my co-host Samantha Youssef and Dennis Claxton, bidding everyone good night or good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Wait, wasn't there supposed to be
What?
like a Dennis quote at the end? Isn't there usually?
Maybe we.
Well, I could give you something actually that I thought
Wasn't
the
that
other
what
day.
you said last time? That
Oh,
there's
that's
usually,
true.
the...
You did say that, didn't you?
Now I don't want to get locked into this,
Oh, okay.
but I did think the other day that if Walt Disney's head is still frozen someplace and he's reanimated somehow. And if I were to run into him, you always that thing, what would you say to this person? I know what I would say to Walt Disney. I would say, Walt Disney, grow the fuck up.